In this episode of The Bev Rules, Dan Caruso sits down with Jane Strode Miller, veteran food industry leader, CEO of Rudi's, and author of Sleep Your Way to the Top and Other Myths About Business Success. From the gritty reality of growing up in Peoria, Illinois, to rebuilding iconic brands and pioneering natural foods, Jane shares a journey shaped by resilience and her unwavering commitment to hard work. She explains what led her to a career in working for household names like Frito-Lay, Hostess, and Heinz, and why purpose and passion ultimately guided her into the natural products movement. Jane reflects on the shifting values of today's workforce, the privilege of reinvention, and the mindset required to take risks, make mistakes, and keep moving forward. This conversation is an unfiltered look at the forces reshaping consumer habits, leadership, and entrepreneurship, and the personal clarity it takes to thrive amid disruption. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Jane, I'm excited to have you as a guest. You've been such a prominent leader in the Boulder community as well as in your industry, which we'll get into a little bit later. So this is going to be fantastic. And I think it's fair to say you've been probably an inspiration. I say probably because I'm a step removed to lots and lots of people in your industry, particularly women in your industry who aspire to be leaders. And we're going to come around to that. But I want to start with I was in E-Town a couple of weeks ago. We visited there, had to do with a music fest that's being started for the first time here in Boulder called the Roots Music Fest that we're getting behind. And, that led us, when we're researching that led us to go into E-Town. And I got a big tour, met, the people behind E-Town, and it brought back a memory of you, and a memory of you where I had the honor to interview you on stage there. I think you recall that.
Mm-hmm.
And the interview was coincided with the book that you had just launched at the time. This was a number of years back. So, and I really enjoyed doing that. So tell us about that book, why you wrote it, what it was all about, and then we're going to use that as kind of an anchor to look backwards in your career from there, because you started out in the corporate world and ended up as an entrepreneurial leader. So we're going to bridge all that together, but I want to start with kind of that book and that point in time when you published it and what that meant to you and what you were trying to accomplish with that book, what it was all about, and again, highlighting the fact that I got to sit there on stage with you and ask you a bunch of questions about the book, which was certainly an honor for me.
Well, first of all, I'm so excited to be here, and I am so in awe of everything that you do in Colorado for entrepreneur system, and I am just a very small part of that, but mentoring is so key to me, and I know we'll have a chance to kind of weave that in, but that has a lot to do with my book. But E-Town is so special to me. Nick Forster and Helen Forster have such an amazing venue there. And you were also at my book signing, and which was like 11 years ago, where we had kind of a big event there. And it was very, very special. But the book is called Sleep Your Way to the Top and Other Myths About Business Success. And I published it. The Foundry Group actually published it in 2014. Yes,
oh,
Brad. Wow. And Seth and company had, for a very short amount of time, they were going to reinvent publishing. And I was their first hardback book. And then we also did an audio version of that. So it was really, really fun because Brad Feld in particular he was like the final editor on my book.
You know what's crazy? He was the editor on my book too.
Oh, no way.
I don't even know how, other than I was finishing up the book, and he and I said I called him. We never talk on the phone, but we talked via Voxer, which is kind of a walkie-talkie app where you leave kind of a voice memo and people return it back. And so I said, hey, Brad, I'm getting close to finalizing this book. I wonder if you could kind of do a quick flip through and give me any thoughts. He's like, yeah, send it over. So I send it over. And he's like, no, send over in the Microsoft Word and give me editing privileges. Like, okay. Well, this, as you probably know, is a thick book.
Yes.
It's not a thin book. He went through every word, every page. He told me what really resonated. He told me, I'm not sure this is, a great segue. And then he was hard co-editing it too. Like, I think you need an apostrophe S there or something like that. And I'm like, dude, you're going through this book and you're doing all this. What can I do in return? He's like, nothing. You're my friend. I did find something to do for him in return, but that's interesting. He just did it on his own without being prompted, but certainly with zero expectation that he would have, taken the initiative to do that. And the what he gave me was awesome. I mean, what he the reinforcements he gave me, the fact that he's like, man, I was in the industry myself, and he's like, I was in the industry, but I was in it more from a .com, not a telecom meltdown perspective. So he knew the story kind of like the back of his hand if it told through the .com, .bomb lens, but he only had kind of periphery awareness of what we went through. So he's like, I learned so much in it, and we intersected a few times in the story, and it was fascinating. So wow, what did he do when he edited your book?
Well, he did. Well, he actually had a physical version and went page by page with a pen. And I probably still have that someplace because it was amazing. And the thing that he did for me that was, I think, kind of a breakthrough was my book tells a lot of personal stories of my career and the kind of the stories that most people don't tell about the stuff that didn't work. And what I tried to do was, in every sense of talking about things that didn't work, always take responsibility for it, not blame it on somebody else or the circumstance or whatever. And so in that way, these somewhat bad situations that I put myself in, I was never really highlighting somebody in a negative way. But what I did in my first draft was I never mentioned any of the big companies that I worked for. I had it be very general. And I've worked for PepsiCo and for Heinz and Best Foods and Hostess and a lot of, major companies in big roles. And as Brad went through it, he's like, this just doesn't feel personal enough. Yeah. Like, you don't have to name the names of, the guys, generally all guys that I had interactions with in ways that didn't always work out perfectly, but you need to tell the company and you need to tell what your role was. You need to be more specific because otherwise it just doesn't feel like you're being totally transparent. And I think it really changed the feeling of the book. I mean, it was kind of the same stories, but it felt more personal. And after I came out with the book, again, this was mainly from the first start of my career, the number of women that reached out to me that read the book that were like, oh my gosh, I've had that same experience and it was deeply impactful was amazing. So the book, the idea was that I love to mentor, but I couldn't figure out how you could scale mentoring. And, so I'd have one-to-one with you, one-to-one with somebody else, one-to-one like that, which I love, but I felt like I was always giving the same advice. And this was generally, sort of college age to maybe 30 years old, kind of in that sort of sweet spot where I was doing a lot, especially I had been on the board of the University of Colorado for a long time. So I decided to try to put it all in one place and all this advice. And it's a funny business book. And so it's the title, Sleep Your Way to the Top and Other Myths About Business Success, came from a story that happened in my career when I was at Frito-Lay and I was moving from marketing into sales. And nobody ever moved from marketing to sales because marketing was like the powerhouse. But I really was enamored by running a sales organization and not just, doing marketing stuff, but having a huge team of people that were working for me. So this, one key position came up and again, there weren't any women in these roles. There'd never been anybody from marketing that had been in these roles. And so I got selected and the rumor that went around was I must have slept with somebody to get the job. And it always stuck with me, which was how my confidence was so shaken that somebody would say that. And that there's so many things in our young careers, especially, that shake our confidence, that I wanted to try to put that all in a book where I can give different examples and talk a little bit about that. So I thought I was a pretty confident young woman. But if my confidence could be shaken by a rumor that had nothing to do with anything that I could have done, well, I mean, if you could sleep with somebody to get to the top, why wouldn't you do that, right? I mean, it seems a lot easier than having to be work hard and do everything else. But so that was kind of how the idea was born. And then the book is structured as a series of myths. Like bigger is always better, just kind of funny titles. And that's, about a big job is important. It's not always important. You can be doing a small job and that really contributes to your overall success.
I want to talk a little bit more about, people can be mean in a workplace.
No question.
And sometimes they're not necessarily intending on being mean. They're intending on just, filling in time of the day and, being a little mischievous and kind of, saying stuff. But, word spreads around and a little bit of telephone tag and maybe something gets embellished or whatever. And it can affect, I know that would, affect me a lot during my career. It's like, what are people saying? Why would they say that? That's not what really happened. And you almost, I think one of the keys to really being successful, particularly in a corporate environment or a bigger organizational environment, is to learn to adapt to that where you don't let it get the better of you. But that's easier said than done because especially when you're not used to that. I mean,
Yes.
it could be feeling like an overwhelming set of pressure that can get the better of a lot of people. And, that's interesting that you bring that specific example up because, yeah, I would say for people in their career, it's like, boy, if you want to thrive in your career, probably the more success you have, the more vulnerable you are to people throwing darts at your way. And
Absolutely.
sometimes it's just because they got nothing better to do. Sometimes it is, coming from the wrong place. Sometimes it's coming from, who are you gonna, throw darts at someone who, is just not doing something of significance? No, they're not. They're more fun to pick on the rising star or the person who got the big promotion or the person who, got a big commission check. So yeah, that could be daunting at times.
Well, and it's interesting because I think what I've realized in my career is that confidence is such a key factor to success.
Mhm.
I think hard work is, I think having, emotional intelligence, I think, you need to have some smarts, but this is like having this personal confidence that you can be successful is so important. And there's so many things I think, especially early in our careers, that shake that confidence. And then how do you build it and how do you kind of show up in a way that's not cocky, but instead sure-footed, I would
Mhm.
say. And so a lot of the book is really about trying to share my examples of like every mistake that I possibly could have made in my career. I made it, but somehow I've had an amazingly successful career
Yeah.
for me.
One of the keys to entrepreneurial success, which is different words, but almost exactly what you're talking about, is the most successful entrepreneurs are very decisive. That doesn't mean they're very right, because they're not always right when they're
Right.
decisive, but they're
Right.
very decisive and they're very confident, not always that they're right, because I think someone who's overconfident that they're always right, that's a derailer. But when they make a decision, they're confident it was the right decision at that point in time, but they're also don't get hung up on changing their mind. So
Right.
if I made a decision, I'm confident that's the right decision. I start telling them, okay, we're going to march up that hill because that's the right hill to take. We start marching up that hill, and I'm like, oh, okay, maybe this wasn't the right hill. It's that hill over there.
Right,
They're like,
right.
okay, new plan this morning. We're going to go up that hill instead of that hill. I hope I had a good night's sleep. We're going that direction. And they don't get caught up in, oh my gosh, everyone's going to realize I was wrong when I said this hill. I'm like, I don't care if they think I'm wrong. They could talk all they want about like, boy, was he stupid to go up that hill. I now know it's the other hill and I'm going to do it. So they were both confident, decisive, but not stubborn that, when they realized more information came to them and they want to, do a pivot on where they're going. And I think, admitting, as you said, and acknowledging that, you do make mistakes, that you can, you don't have to always publicly own your mistakes, but you certainly have to privately assess what you did wrong and what you could have done better. And as importantly, not continue on whatever it was that you did wrong before.
Right,
Kind
right.
of move on and redirect. And I think people could do that at a rapid scale. They learn more, they adapt more, but they also, can lead others, to what is eventually maybe a much better path.
Yeah, I love that analogy. And, I've never been an entrepreneur. I've always been an operator for 25 years with big companies and the last 15 or so with private equity backed smaller companies.
But entrepreneurial companies in
But
the
entrepreneurial
last many
companies,
years
yeah.
of your career, yeah.
But this pivot thing is so critical. I think it is this being willing to fail. Like I love that idea of going up the hill because I've definitely done that where you're up there, people follow you, and you're all at the top of the hill and you're like, oh, like you said, we need to get over there. But then just march back down and go up the other hill and you hope that's the right one. And if
Yeah.
it's not, you march back down and go find the next hill.
Yeah.
And I think so many people are afraid to fail. And most things are not like critical failures. Like you haven't murdered somebody. You're does do something that's going to be crazy. It's just a learning experience. And I love how you said that, which is like, how do you learn from it? How do you kind of rapidly iterate, And I'm probably overly decisive, which is I am very much, shoot, ready, aim in
Yep.
some cases.
Which
But
is the right way in my book.
you know,
As these guys know, I do a lot of shoot, fire, aim.
I mean, it works, It's a lot of people are so uncomfortable with that. I have different people over time that have worked with me, and they think I'm way too, have too short of a trigger, and just like when I move too quickly. But I just love action. I like to just like keep things moving. I could not be in a job where I'm just like, driving a big bus or something, where it's always the same thing every day. And, maybe you hit a speed bump and that's the most exciting thing that happens.
So you touched on it briefly when we were talking about your book, that you worked for some of those iconic consumer food brand companies, not one, not two, but at least three.
Right.
Tell us that portion of your journey. What led you down that path? How'd you end up at so many of the most iconic kind of consumer-facing product companies, food product companies, and what was that journey like for you?
Well, if you don't mind, if you would bear with me, I'd like to kind of go back a little bit to sort of my upbringing, because it
Please.
sort of frames a little bit of sort of what happened. And, maybe for some of your listeners, how much that serendipity impacts us, how trying to be open all the time for opportunities to keep learning. Some of the same themes we'll probably keep talking about. So I'm from Peoria, Illinois. My mom got pregnant with me when she was a teenager, right out of high school, and then married my dad, and then proceeded to have, I have three younger brothers.
Tell people what Peoria, I grew up in Southside Chicago and went to University of Illinois, so I know a bit about Peoria, but tell people what it means to grow up in Peoria, Illinois. What was Peoria like? What kind of town is it?
So Peoria is in the center of Illinois. There used to be a saying, is if it plays in Peoria, because Peoria was many years ago, was the most average place, I think, in the U.S.
Kind of like Columbus, Ohio.
Yeah, just that sort of like, Midwest values. It's so funny because you don't appreciate it when you're growing up. But growing up in the Midwest, to me, is like such a hallmark of like all my values and who I am as a person. And so Caterpillar was the big player there. My dad did not work for Caterpillar, but he was a sheet metal worker that did contract work for Caterpillar. Because literally, I can't remember the stats, but I think it was like 3 out of every 4 people in Peoria in some way was involved with Caterpillar, back in the 60s. And so just a very average town, just Midwestern values. So, grew up
somewhat rural, right?
Yeah, we lived in
rural-ish.
town, but yeah, it's a little bit more rural, I would
Yeah.
say. So it's not like being in the South Side of Chicago. So it's definitely, I can't remember how many people were there, but it's more. It might be like the 4th or 5th biggest town in Illinois, but it's a far cry from Chicago. But great place to grow up. And so I had 3 younger brothers, as I said. My mother was a stay-at-home mom, and because she had 4 kids, and she didn't have any education. My dad went from being a sheet metal worker to a bowling alley manager. So his whole career was he always aspired to be a professional bowler. So he was always in the bowling alley world. And when I was about 13, and my youngest twin brothers were 3, my dad left us and to be with somebody else, another person. And here's my mother. At that time, she's like just over 30 years old, never had a job, doesn't have an education, and has 4 kids. And back in those days, you could be a deadbeat dad. And my dad was pretty much that guy. And so my mom all of a sudden is, on her own. And so she worked 3 jobs at any one time. She was the school bus. Literally, when I talk about driving the bus, she drove the bus, the school bus in the morning. Then she went to a nursing home and was like the activity director. And then she went to the police station when it was the 911 operator at night. So she had like 3 jobs all the time. And we still never had any money whatsoever. I like to always sort of frame my career in that what I learned from my mom was that hard work was absolutely essential to everything that we do. But maybe more importantly, I was never going to be in a situation where I had to depend on somebody. This might be deeper than you want to go into, but there's like an like psychological thing, which is, oh, I am never going to be in that situation where somebody's going to leave me and I'm going to have 4 kids and not have any money. It was like, I was just absolutely convinced that, I was a really good student, kind of nerdy. So I was second in my class in high school. So I knew that education was a key because my mom didn't have that.
Yep.
And she was the biggest supporter. I mean, she was like, you have to have an education. Another mom in her situation could have said, Jane, stay and work at, Target, and help me with the boys. But she was like, go little bird, get out of the nest. You need to go on. So I did well in high school.
How young were your brothers at the time?
So I was 13. I have a brother who's a year and a half younger than me. And then I had twin brothers that were 10 years younger. So they were 3.
How did they fend? Because if your mom was working all the time and...
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's honestly, there's a whole nother story there. It was almost like growing up in a different family. My brother, who's closest to my age, had my dad there for, until we were young teenagers. And then when my parents broke up, my mom went through a series of every boyfriend that you could possibly imagine. And it was really, really rough on my little brother. So I would say we were like lower middle class when my dad was around. We were dirt poor when my dad left. And then within a few years, I was off to college, and my brother was off doing other things. So the little guys, the twins, they grew up like in a whole different situation. So which was really difficult. But I'll maybe dial the clock forward to now. We're all super close, and it's kind of an amazing story. So wanted to get good grades. I went to Knox College. Do you know where that's in Galesburg? It's which is about 45 minutes out of Peoria. I didn't know that you could actually apply to like a bunch of different schools. I mean, because no one in my family had ever gone to college before. So I didn't even know that like there was like a Harvard or a Yale or a Northwestern, or I was just like knew that there was University of Illinois.
Yes.
And there was Knox College. And my counselor was like, you should, Knox would be good. They have a lot of scholarship money because, we didn't have any money to go to school. Yep. So I went to Knox, and I was a Russian major. And
why a Russian major?
I wanted to go to law school. So my goal was I wanted to be a lawyer. And the reason why I wanted to be a lawyer was I knew lawyers were rich. And my number one thing was I was going to be rich. So that was going to be the key thing. And I didn't know anybody was rich. And I didn't know how you got to be rich, but I just knew that lawyers had to be rich. So I was going to, it sounds so funny to say it now because I'm sure anybody who's like in college would not say anything quite that idiotic, but it's really.
And most people are lawyers are like, oh man, I wish I knew then what I know now. I wouldn't have been a lawyer.
Oh my God, I would have been the worst lawyer ever. You've known me long enough. I'm like, I'd be terrible. But I studied Russian because I wanted to get good grades, and I had studied French and German in high school and done well, and I'd been a foreign exchange student to Turkey. So languages really came naturally to me. So what I wanted to do was study and get good grades so I could go to law school. So I graduate, do really well in college. I moved down to Dallas, Texas when I graduate. And I'm going to look for a job before I take the LSAT and the GMAT, the LSAT, not the GMAT. So here I am, 22 years old, have been like top of my class in high school, did extremely well in college. I moved down to Dallas, and I literally was unemployable. Like nobody in Texas had ever heard of Russia, let alone that anybody had a Russian degree. Like what kind of and I had never learned
I thought
how.
You were a Russian spy.
Exactly. My brother still think I'm in the CIA actually. So I got a job, and I'll pick up the pace on this, but this really kind of sort of sets the foundation to how I got to work for all these big companies. So I got a job at a bank, like one of those little teeny local banks where you walk in and there's a girl at the front desk who is like the receptionist and says, the the loan officers are here, the bathrooms are there, the tellers are over there, and that was my job. But I hardly made anything, so I also worked at night at Lord & Taylor and on the weekends in the men's department selling ties. So I had 2 jobs. So here I am, 22 years old. I've had this amazing academic career, and now I'm in Dallas working as a receptionist and in the tie department at Lord & Taylor, and I'm like, what has happened to me?
Yeah.
Like, what's happened to my fabulous career that I imagined myself as this great lawyer?
Making a bunch of money.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, like barely making minimum wage. But the most amazing thing happened. So these 2 jobs, and this is why this is so important as part of my story. I had never been in a business environment, and in the bank, I was in a business environment, and I loved it. And the retail thing will play itself out in a second too. So I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to take the LSAT because my dream is to be a lawyer. But I kind of like this business thing. So why don't I take the GMAT and see how I do there? Well, turns out the LSAT, I was like mediocre. The GMAT, I killed it. I have no idea like how that happened, how your brain works or how that happens. And that particular year, the Zale Corporation, which was a big jewelry corporation, had a full scholarship to go to SMU to get an MBA for someone who had retail experience.
Wow.
So think about that.
Yes.
Because of the bank, I learned about business. Because I sold ties at Lord & Taylor, I ended up getting a full scholarship from the Zales Corporation to get my MBA. And so whenever I think about...
From a top university on top of it.
Yeah, I mean, and SMU then was not quite like what it is today, but it was still an amazing education. But like, who would guess that? And so whenever I'm talking to someone who's starting their career and they're like, oh, I'm working at Starbucks, or I'm doing this, horrible job, or I've got this internship, it's like, don't look at it like that.
Yeah.
Like, you never know what it's going to lead to. So anyway, I was getting my MBA, and Frito-Lay was a big employer in Dallas. And so I interviewed for a job there in marketing, and I got turned down. So I went to work for a bank as a credit analyst, which I never would have been a good lawyer, and I was even a worse credit analyst, I have to say. That was how I started my career as a credit analyst. And about a year later, I get a call from somebody at Frito-Lay, and they say, hey, we'd like you to come back and talk to us about a job. And I'm like on the phone going, this is like a prank, right?
Yeah.
Or something. Like, they just turned me down a year ago. Well, it turned out that I had interviewed with 7 people, and one of the most senior guy was the only one that didn't like me because I was kind of like I am today, just very informal and kind of goofy in some ways, I guess, unprofessional. And he didn't like me, and so he was the veto. Well, he got fired. And so the other people were like, who was that girl from SMU that was a Russian major, which wasn't too hard to find? And so they called SMU, they found me, and I started at Frito-Lay in marketing.
Did the Russian major factor in, since you mentioned that they remembered you had a Russian major? Was it an international job they were envisioning you for?
No, it was just an entry-level marketing job, but they remembered me because I had a Russian major.
Yeah,
and that was the thing that was unique about me, I guess. Yeah. And then so that they could find me. And so I started at Frito, and that's kind of that's how I got in the food business. Mm-hmm. And then, probably like many of us, just sort of start to go down a trajectory, and you kind of stay on it.
Yeah. And what made you effective in the food business? Because obviously you were effective because of everything that happened since then, but what was it that really made it both resonate with you, but also made you able to shine in that industry?
I think it goes back to a couple themes that I've already hit on a little bit. It was funny because being from Peoria, coming from the family that I came from, having the SMU education, I had never traveled any place. I never had any internships. I mean, I literally worked as a cashier at the equivalent of Target back then. And, Frito-Lay was a premier company, and they hired everybody. I mean, SMU really was not considered, everybody was Harvard or Stanford or Northwestern.
Yeah, because the big food companies, if you don't go to the university they expect you to go to, they don't want you. They got their, at least back then, they'd have their, we only hire people from these 5 universities.
Exactly. I mean, so I like felt like I was I was sort of like I felt like I was a little bit of a lower class citizen, but I was also, everybody else, came from these big universities. They'd traveled all over the world. They were like all this, and I'm just like from Peoria, Illinois, and I have a degree from SMU. So I think I just at first just kind of kept my head down a lot and just worked hard. And one of the things I feel like I try to do in my life is be a continual learner. And so this idea that you're just like, somebody gives me this and I want that plus something else. Like I want to just keep doing more and trying to exceed expectations. And I think it was just part of my DNA just to work really hard. I think to really try to always do more than was asked of me. And then I think I'm also try to be an observer of people, like who people listen to and who they didn't listen to, and how I could become someone that was really trying to adapt my style in a way that was authentic to me, but to see sort of what the vibe was and how things were working. So I do think a lot of it was just having a lot of initiative and just being willing to put in the hard work.
Yep. And what products did you work on that were most interesting to you? Do you remember some of the product launches or brands that you were responsible for, whether there or the other companies that really stood out to you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I have a couple.
Not late in your career. I don't want you to go. We're going to get to like,
more recently.
More recently, and what you've done in the more kind of, in the special ecosystem that Boulder is around natural foods and food tech in general. But in the corporate career, what products really jumped at you? Maybe it was a brand, maybe it was an advertising campaign, maybe it was a new launch.
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's so many a couple of examples that might resonate a little bit. First one is I was a team that brought chili cheese Fritos into the world. So anybody likes chili cheese Fritos, those have been around for a long time, but I was part of the team that did that. I think we had some new products that didn't make it. One was called McCracken's Apple Chips, and I was the brand manager on that. And to see like how a product, you try to launch it and how it's not successful was really,
what held that product back in retrospect?
It was the Frito-Lay distribution system. So if you think about a direct store-door distribution system, a guy on a truck delivering products to a store, putting them on the shelves, which is how it works. You really have to have velocities so that they can make amount of money. So if the average guy who's doing that would only sell Doritos all day if he could, but he's got to carry Ruffles and Lay's and Cheetos and Fritos. Well, McCracken's Apple Chips could not possibly. I mean, Apple Chips was just not a big enough category, and we did all the analysis on this, and in fact, I think we were going to use the entire Apple production in the U.S. if we actually made it as big as Fritos or something like that. But it just wasn't. It just didn't have enough velocities to be able to survive. But it was a great experience to understand how a product lives and breathes and can be successful. Other things. I was part of a team that got Hostess out of bankruptcy. So, Twinkies are still around.
What caused Hostess to go into bankruptcy? Because Hostess was and still is such a important brand.
It's iconic. It's owned by Smuckers today. It was the cost infrastructure was really out of line. They had a lot of plants. They also had a direct store door delivery system that was all unionized, and it was a very expensive way to go to market. So we got it out of bankruptcy. Then it went back into bankruptcy, and that's when I switched over to the natural products industry. And then the next team that came in literally took away all the direct store door and just made it go warehouse, and that took a lot of cost out of it. So these food companies, unlike maybe some of your experience, the margins are razor thin to begin with, and so to really be able to manage the economics, it's very, very difficult to make sure that you've got the right equation of the right number of people, the right marketing, et cetera.
Yep. So love going off on tangents, and I'm going to bring you on a tangent that will probably bring us to Boulder and natural food industry. But I want to start in the here and now and what's happening relative to RFK and Make America Healthy Again, and kind of looking back at how the food consumption by Americans has gotten way out of whack with unhealthy foods, originating from the time that was probably early in your career. So, as you're hearing and applying your expertise now and looking back at kind of what we were eating when we were growing up,
Right.
how do you think about that? How do you process that? But I guess it's a little bit of processed food, so I
Yeah,
probably shouldn't use
exactly.
processed. But how do you make sense of kind of what is it that had caused kind of Americans to go down a path of eating so much food that's just not good for us? We all grew up on that. It was a sense of pride that you had ho-hos in your closet
Right.
and Pop-Tarts in the morning, and for me, Count Chocula, for my
Right,
cereal.
right.
But it was just the norm, and no one even thought anything about it. What was that all about? As you reflect back.
It's interesting because I've been in the natural products industry, as I said, a little over 15 years now. And I never regretted that 25 years of being, selling Doritos or Heinz ketchup or whatever. Because I never thought as much about at the time how food was impacting people's diets. I was much more centered on how me as a leader could impact people's lives. That, everybody for the most part, needs to have a job. And you want to work in an organization where you can trust somebody who's the leader. And I always the way I sort of looked at all these big companies with processed food was less about the product that I was selling and more about the impact that I could make on the people. So that's sort of how I would have framed that. But then I got into the natural products.
But people at the time wouldn't have. I mean, when you were selling cigarettes, or your neighbor's, dad was selling cigarettes, worked for a cigarette company, you're like, oh, they're bad people. They're kind of
Right.
pushing a product that's obviously bad on people. But that was never how anyone looked at processed foods. We didn't look at people who were selling Heinz ketchup so that people could put it on their French fries and eat it by the handfuls as being a bad thing. That you were bringing joy to people by giving them food they wanted to eat, that tastes good to them, that that felt like that brought pleasure in just eating it. Um,
And I think the convenience factor was so much for
Convenience.
for at least my generation, of kind of growing up, that it was like all of a sudden, mom wasn't making this big dinner at night. Everybody could just eat all this
The
stuff
microwave
fast, and
oven,
yeah,
vegetables out of
or
cans.
or banquet, like TV dinners or whatever was there. So I think you're right. I think that there was so much of a movement in terms of convenience and happiness from eating like all these, like a ho-ho or Doritos or whatever, that it was less sort of thinking about the food. And there were so many pioneers in the natural products industry, many that live here in Boulder, that way before I got the Kool-Aid to really understand how important it is what you put into your body, that they were like a voice in the wilderness.
When did you start to realize the importance of natural foods and healthiness through food?
I would say I always ate healthy. So I would say, even though I worked for all these companies that had some processed foods, my own personal diet has always been more of sort of meat and vegetables, sort of more basic kind of stuff. I cook every night, and I don't like stuff in boxes and processed food and everything. So I think I always had that bias, but I never thought about it on a bigger scale until I had the chance to become the CEO of Rudi's Bakery here in Boulder in 2008. And so I would say my personal lifestyle was healthy, but I didn't focus on that from, being an advocate for what we need to eat and how what we need to do. And it's interesting because I believe really strongly that so many of these processed foods have impacted all the allergies that are so prevalent today, and how immune systems are much more weakened than they ever were. I mean, I feel like I like ate worms and dirt and something, so I could eat, like I have a stomach of steel. But in my business, I'm always around people that have gluten allergies or peanut allergies, or just what. We have peanut and gluten allergies here.
Yes, peanut allergy.
All right, I'm going to talk to you about Rudi's because we got some amazing products that we're coming out with. But when I came to Rudi's, it was just this sort of amazing thing where I started to get in the industry, and people are starting to talk about like clean labels and things that, not having things on the label that you can't pronounce, and really this almost going back to basics. I mean, Rudi's was founded in 1976 and was one of the first, like clean label bread companies by, have you ever met Sheldon Romer?
No.
He's amazing. He's the founder of Rudi's. He lives here. He was, he sold the company like in 2000 to some private equity guys. And he's an authentic leadership coach. But his family was in the Holocaust, and bread was this amazing thing that was like, it was about sharing. And so he started the company, and everything was like stuff that was just so pure and good to eat. And so when you actually start to become aware of ingredients and how it can impact your health, it actually is, it's startling. And I won't go into any politics over the next time we have together, but
Are you sure I won't be able to drag you into that?
All I can say is, who would have guessed that RFK Jr. would be the biggest proponent of natural foods and getting rid of dyes and all this stuff that is so bad? I mean, it's absolutely amazing. And it's for our industry, I think you couldn't actually have a better person who's really saying like this stuff should have been gone a long time ago. Why was it still here?
Yeah. This is probably a little bit embarrassing to say, but for a pretty extended period of time, I thought, Whole Foods, the whole movement around that was just a marketing scam to get you to spend more money for whatever it was you're buying. I'm like, I was late to the party of really appreciating that there's a difference between truly healthy food and healthy ingredients and the kind of stuff I was used to buying. I wouldn't even think twice about it. Tell us about the role Boulder has played and still plays this day in the world of natural foods. And I don't know if the right way to say it is Boulder or Colorado. So maybe you could distinguish between how much this is Boulder-centric versus Colorado-centric. But what role have we played? How important is this geography to kind of the development of the natural food industry?
Oh, that's such a great question. I mean, this is the epicenter for natural products. What I would say is
It's interesting because I said natural food and you said natural products.
Yes.
So draw that distinction first. Why did you go to the word products, not food?
Because there's so many things besides food. There's lotions, and there are supplements, and there are clothes. There are so many things that are bigger than just what we put in our body is what we also put on our body too. So the natural products industry really encompasses so much more than just food, and also beverages too. So so it's interesting. Boulder is not the Mecca anymore because now there's Meccas all over the country, which is super exciting. But it really kind of started here with a number of guys that, again, since we're in different industry, I don't know if you would know any of these names, but a Mark Retzloff or a Steve
yes, I know Mark.
Demos, Haas Hassan. These guys were, in natural products before anybody really knew what natural products were. And they created, along with others, way before I entered the scene, just this really collegial, like we got to help each other. Like this is really about Steve Hughes. I don't know. Do you know Steve? He ran Boulder Brands, and he's
he's
an
I don't know him well, but
he's an amazing guy, and is a great mentor and friend to many. But all these guys, and they were really kind of all guys, were starting Silk, which is now part of Danone, or starting Celestial Seasonings, which is Mo Siegel actually, and all of these companies that were sort of started here. And what these guys did was they just created this environment of collaboration. And it wasn't like, competition, it was like the big guys have 99.9% of the food. We've got this little piece of it. So we can all kind of help each other, and so that we can have a bigger part of it. And so I think, I'm not going to get all the history right, but I think a number of these men really started to create that. And then some 20 some years ago, I want to say Naturally Boulder got established. And Naturally Boulder, which is now Naturally Colorado, just most recently changed to that, became this place where you could collaborate with others. You could have, educational sessions. You could, learn about how you get into distributors. I mean, all the kind of the basics of the food business. So really very collaborative. And Naturally Boulder, which is now Naturally Colorado, is now part of the Naturally Network. And when I say there's meccas all over, there's a Naturally Chicago, and there's a Naturally San Diego, and a Naturally San Francisco.
Are they all tied together?
They're all tied together.
This organization that Genesis was Naturally Boulder?
Yes, exactly.
Wow.
And it kind of elevated up to now this thing called Naturally Network. And it's, again, there's New York, and it's kind of all across the country. But I think it really started with a group of people that said, we're going to be more powerful together than competing against each other. And it's not us against each other, it's us against the big guys. And I think it just, so when people started companies, they would come here to Boulder to start. I mean, Justin Gold, have you ever met, do you know Justin?
Yeah, I met him a few times.
Justin is, he's actually working with me on the Rudi's team now, which is.
Well, tell Justin I'm going to get him on this podcast, because I need to get to know him better myself. There's no better way to do that than have him on a podcast. He is
one of the most magnificent entrepreneurs. And when I talk about Rudi's, I'll talk about his role and why a guy that doesn't need to work and is just an amazing mentor and stuff works for me at Little Rudi's. But so Justin came here. Christy Lewis, who started Quinn Snacks, came here. Brooke Eddy with Bhakti Chai. I mean, there's all these companies where people actually moved here to have the infrastructure and the vibe and the networking of what was happening here in Boulder.
And natural groceries, grocery stores, Boulder played some role in the origination of that as well. Is that right?
Yeah, Vitamin Cottage is based here, which is now called Natural Grocers. Whole Foods is here. I mean, Lucky's is a local chain that is, a natural chain. So yeah, there's been a lot.
Wild Oats is that here?
Wild Oats was here. Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, there was a couple of natural food stores that way before my time that were sort of the beginning ones. In fact, a fun little tidbit. I talked about all the men here in Boulder while they were doing all this. The woman who ended up founding Lily's, which was the company that I was the CEO of until a few years ago, ran a natural food store in Philadelphia. And so she was like a pioneer in natural foods, but by herself in Philadelphia. And now she's part of Naturally Network as a founder and a mentor and board member.
Great. So you came to Boulder because of Rudi's, or did you come to Boulder and then end up with Rudi's? What was the sequence there?
I was already here.
And what got you here?
So my husband, one of his best friends lived in Boulder. And so the first time I came here was 1985, and he was Michael Rice of Sterling Rice Group. I don't know if you know Rick Sterling or Michael Rice. It's a big.
I know the name.
So Sterling Rice Group is now called SRG. They had just started as an agency, and so we came here. Michael had come here before, but when we started going out, I came here in 1985, and it's just so funny. Having grown up in Illinois and not having traveled any place, had grown up in Illinois, moved to Dallas. The first time I came to Colorado, it was like, oh my God, why doesn't everybody live here? Of course, now everybody's figured that out. But 40 years ago, it was.
We got a lot more room here.
It was like, seeing the mountains and everything about it was amazing. So that was my first time here. And then I had the chance to move here in right around 2002. And so I've been here since 2002. Nice. And just came here, just had an opportunity to move here. So.
Yep. And at that point, were you still working for the big big food
No, I
world?
had just actually sold. So I went from Frito-Lay. I don't know if you know, I actually did a 1-year stint in technology at Gateway Computers.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, the worst year of my life. I missed the boring old food business, and I went from there to run the Oro Wheat business, which was part of a big company called Best Foods. That sold a couple of times, and when it sold to Grupo Bimbo, which is based out of Mexico, I had the opportunity to take some time off, and I decided to move here.
Gotcha.
So that's what got me here. And then I actually did a couple of different things. Went to work for Hostess. Actually, then went to work for Heinz. I moved to London. Was the president of Heinz in London, and then finally in 2008, the Rudi's job came up, and I just happened to be here. And I'd happened to have been in the bread business, so I was kind of uniquely qualified.
Yep. So walk us through Rudi's. Rudi's back then, Rudi's now. Take us through the Rudi's journey.
So Rudi's, as I said, was established in 1976 by Sheldon, and he had a couple other co-founders. When I stepped in 2008, it was private equity backed, and we were the #1 organic brand in the country, and we came up with a gluten-free bread and became the #2 gluten-free bread in the country. I had an amazing team of people, and it was pretty extraordinary, but probably maybe similar to some others that you've talked to. You know, the private equity firm was at the end of their fund. They really were ready to exit, and so we sold the company to Heinz Celestial in 2014. And at the time,
And Heinz Celestial previously acquired Celestial Seasonings, right?
yes.
And the Hain name, what was the Hain name?
Hain is it's a number of it's different products like canned goods, kosher canned goods products. I think is probably the best way to describe it. So, but if you go back to 2014, they were their leader, Erwin Simon, who's really well known in the industry, was really a collector of brand. He was like the first kind of conglomerate for natural products, and so they had everything from Rudi's to Celestial to Terra Chips to I think Jason's lotion. So again, going back to natural products, not just food. And Rudi's, being the #1 organic bread in the country, was kind of a crown jewel for them to bring on. So we sold to them in 2014, and I went on to do a bunch of other stuff. But after they bought it, you know, as sometimes happens with companies that have a lot of brands that have nothing in common with anything else they have, they weren't really putting any focus on it, and the little brand almost died. And so I'm a collector of rescue dogs and horses, so I kind of think of Rudi's as sort of being like a little rescue company, because it was big, strong, profitable in 2014, but then it just kind of languished. It was then purchased as a distressed asset in 2020. By a private equity firm.
Let's pause there. We'll come back to that. But you did some other things in natural foods between the exit to Heinz Celestial. So take us through the other brands you were part of.
Yeah, I did a couple of different things, and this is what I love about a long career and being able to have wins, like amazing wins, and then incredible failures. I had them all. I definitely like the winning better than the failing, I have to say. So the first year after I sold Rudi's, I came out with my book. Then I kind of went on a speaking tour and was, doing that. I came to Zayo and, talked to your women's group and stuff that year. That was really fun. I taught a class at CU because I thought, well, maybe maybe I should now in this next phase of my life, I should become an instructor or something. And very quickly I realized that was not my calling. I think mainly because I figured I made like $2.50 an hour, and I just, didn't love it enough.
Were you getting any fulfillment out of it?
A lot. Do you know probably Eric Miller from the Deming Center?
Yep.
So Eric and I co-taught a class together, and it was amazing. And there was fulfillment, but I felt like I was kind of missing my calling, which is just running businesses, because that's what I get passionate about. So I joined a company called ProYo, amazing entrepreneur out of Santa Barbara, that's how I fell in love with the Central Coast. I have a house out there now. I just Central Coast California is amazing. But through Nathan, I got to know California. And I was there about a year and a half, and what was very clear, it was too small. Like I had this great realization one weekend where like a true entrepreneur in the food business should want to work at Whole Foods on the weekend sampling Pro-Yo. And I really couldn't bring myself to do that. So I had to sit down with Nathan and say, I'm just not the right person for the job. And he's such a great guy. And it was really kind of hard to leave him. But I left that. Then I went to a company called Cookie Chips, and it was private equity backed. And I was there, for about a year. And it was not a differentiated product is what I would say. It was delicious, very sugary, still all natural. So I'm still in the natural foods industry. But it was kind of a failed venture. But then I had the opportunity. I'd been on the board of Justin's Nut Butters for a long time, and so I knew this.
How'd you end up on the board there?
Justin.
Or tell the Justin story.
Yeah, Justin is, as I mentioned earlier, you have to have him on because nobody can tell his story like he can tell his story. But so I won't tell his whole story. I'll tell how we got to know each other.
Okay.
When he started Justin's, which I think was like 2002, 2003.
Yeah, well, our paths crossed a few times, but we never really got to know each other. And we were at an event at the Dairy Arts Center, and his dad, comes up and says, Justin, come over here. Justin, you need to meet this guy, Dan. Dan, you need to meet Justin. You guys need to get to know each other because you guys need to do stuff together. And I'm like, okay. Because I knew who Justin was, I guess. But, I wouldn't even recognize him as being Justin because he's, I don't know, maybe I just never really knew him. But
right.
So since then we've tried to connect, but we haven't connected. And that was only 2 or 3 months ago.
He is a rock star.
And who's his dad? Tell me about the dad, because the dad I recognized.
No, his father's passed away, I think. So it must have been maybe a mentor or somebody that he knows.
Oh yeah, it must have been someone else.
It might be somebody. It might be. If it was that recently, but it
was just 3 months ago.
Yeah, no, it would have been somebody else. But he's an amazing guy. He started Justin's Nut Butters.
Unless that was a different Justin altogether.
Oh,
but I don't
it could
think
be.
so.
Does he have long curly hair?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's probably Justin.
Yeah, it was Justin.
It was probably. I mean, he is like the son to Minnie, I would say.
Okay.
So that's probably somebody that he knew well in the industry that wanted to introduce you. So he started Justin's Nut Butter, grinding the peanut butter in his garage, literally. He's so intuitive, and he was really the first to market. And his whole thing was, you need protein and you need clean label, and you look at Jif or Skippy or whatever, and that's not just peanuts that are in there, man. And so he started the company, and then I came into Rudi's, and then he reached out to me to try to figure out how to scale the business. How could I mentor with him? And so I kind of opened up. We had a more established team, and I obviously had more experience than him, and became really good friends, became a mentor. He asked me to join the board. And so I was on the journey with him from being like this little teeny company to selling to exiting to Hormel for a huge multiple in 2016. But the journey with Justin, besides us being very good friends, he's like my little brother is probably the best way to describe him, is we both got to know a private equity firm called VMG, which is based out of San Francisco, and they specialize in the natural products industry. And so they were a minority owner in Justin's. And so I got to know them well. So dial the clock forward, when I'm at Cookie Chips, and it looks like this is not going to work out, I get a call from the Wayne Wu, who's a principal at VMG. And they said, we're looking at this company called Lily's Sweets. And if we make this investment in it, we're going to need a CEO. And would you be interested? You need to have a team because it's literally the founder, her 2 kids, and one other person. But we think there's incredible potential here. And so I would say probably, although I feel like I've had a lot of success in my career and, as I said, a lot of failure, Lily's is probably, the thing that I'll be known for, I guess, in the natural foods industry. I stepped in as CEO in 2018 Cynthia Tice, who's the founder, she has been on How I Built This because it's a pretty extraordinary. Her story is extraordinary. And we partnered together, and in 3 years, we took the company from 18 million in sales to 130 million, which is
Wow.
a lot for a natural foods company, and then sold to Hershey's for a nice exit for all of us. So that was
When was the sale to Hershey's?
2021.
So in 3 years?
In 3 years.
Wow.
It was, I mean, it was magical. I mean, and again, I know you've had some amazing experiences. Every once in a while, you get everything happens the way it's
stars
supposed
kind
to.
of align.
The stars totally align. So we had, Cynthia had created amazing products. It was low sugar chocolate. No sugar chocolate. She was first to market. She had incredible velocities, which is a key thing that you need in the food industry, that people are, buying it on repeating a lot. And then we had two acts of God that happened. The first was keto trend. And so everybody who was on keto, if you look at like Google search back in 2017 to 19, like Google search on keto was like the number one thing that anybody was searching. So we had that benefit because we had a keto product, and the influencers in the keto world were insane back then. So, I mean, so we got that. And then COVID hit. Yeah. And the number one category in the whole grocery store in terms of growth, baking chips.
Oh, really?
And we had chocolate bars and we had baking chips. And so the business just exploded. And so it was really, I mean, honestly, it was, I don't think I've ever not worked so hard to have so much benefit. It's just, I think maybe, I don't know if this is your experience, but sometimes when you're working the hardest, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have the best outcome.
So yeah, sometimes when you're working the hardest because you're trying to salvage something. But this, certainly this is easy to say with hindsight, but selling it, during the peak of COVID probably was pretty smart too, because
Oh, absolutely.
I'm sure that like a lot of COVID trends, it kind of went the other direction at some point afterwards.
Oh, the timing. I mean, so yeah, that's the other part of the lucky thing here. If it would have been a year later, it probably would have been a whole different thing. But not only because of what's happening with COVID, but a lot of other competitors starting to come in. And so, there's always sometimes when you're the first to market, you've got like this window of really trying to create something special.
A mistake I see a lot of earlier stage CEOs make is when you have great momentum, so great growth, with that comes great multiples. But what a lot of newer CEOs don't fully process, even when you try to talk them through it, is the multiple is not fixed in time. Like if you're worth, 3 times revenue, if you're worth, 20 times EBITDA, if it's a high number, that's a sign of your pace of growth. Because what investors are looking at is not your revenue right now. They're looking at what they think your revenue is going to be a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. So they get fixated on that multiple as if it's going to be there no matter what over time. And like, well, if I take my 10 times multiple and I wait 2 more years and my revenue's, X% higher, and then I apply to 10 times that, look how much more I'm worth. It's like, yeah, but you better still be growing at this pace, or, or that 10 times multiple is going to be 5 times multiple. Not that your business got worse. It's just that you got credit for the growth spurt you're on. But when your growth spurt starts to kind of slow down, people are going to look forward 2 more years from that, and they're like, okay, it's still good business, but we're going to, the appropriate multiple to apply to it is different now than it would have been 2 years ago. And the CEOs can't do that. They just can't process that so often. And in fact, when they find themselves in that situation, and then they go to raise more money, or like, our next round should be an up round because our revenue's 20% higher than it was before. It's like, yeah, but when you raised money before, they were raising because your revenue was supposed to be 40% higher. And it's only 20% higher, and you're going to get, penalized for that, because not only is your growth, maybe not going as fast on a forward looking, but you didn't even get the growth that you were expected to get and your valuation reflected before. And they lose so much time and energy and focus on that. And especially if they had a chance to exit and they didn't take the opportunity because of that simple math, then they they just don't even know and they blame it on investors. The investors, they're misvaluing my company now. They're valuing it right before, but now they're not valuing it right now. It's like,
Right.
no, your growth profile changed.
Can I ask you a question? Because I'm really intrigued about this. As you've had so many successes, and I've had some successes and failures and stuff. Do you feel like that you have a playbook? Like, is it like, because let me just give my bias, which is every situation is so different that if we had a playbook, then we'd all be successful all the time. But well, how do you look at that? Because when you talk about new CEOs, it's kind of like, well, if I just do the 5 things that Jane did at Lily's, I'm going to be successful. And it's like, you could do those 5 things, but there's all these other things that are going on around it. I don't
Yeah.
know. How do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I've never had time for a playbook. It's what we talked about earlier. It's like if you're spending your time coming up with a playbook and then you're executing against the playbook, the world's probably passing you by while you're either working on your playbook or trying to execute your playbook. The success stories with kind of the entrepreneurs, is their instincts, their willingness to make decisions early, not get caught up if they don't get indecisive because they're not sure what the right decision is. They look at whatever information available at the time. They make a decision. Sometimes they sound like like they're evangelizing their decision as if they so know it's right they would never change it. But then, as we talked about earlier, 2 weeks later they could change their mind and say, "Oh, okay, maybe that wasn't the right decision. I'm going to go this route instead." So I think I've had the natural instinct to be very decisive, often very wrong. Sometimes stubborn, but not overly stubborn.
Right.
Being willing to pivot, being willing to adjust, being willing to, as we talked about earlier, accept the fact that people are, you're exposing yourself when you behave that way. You're exposing yourself to people who want to throw darts at you. So for whatever reason, having thick enough skin to not get overwhelmed by kind of negative feedback loops that are trying to kind of get in your way and somehow just plowing through them. So, I've had strategies, and I've always been told, I could see around the corner a couple of times, but the truth of it is, you kind of can see blurry visions around corners, but you got to be willing to kind of adapt and adjust quickly, decisively, and not stubbornly. To me, that's so key. And, I think a lot of that's instinctive, but one thing I have not been good at, which would have made me far better, is I would have been that person that, I just described, the person who was getting good advice from someone who been there and had done that, but said, I'm not listening to that person because I don't think they're right. So I would have ignored that advice and had to learn the hard way too often. So
Yeah.
I think people who can also, and I think you're probably much better than this than I've been, people who could build mentoring relationships on both sides as a mentor and as a mentee, and learn more from others and be vulnerable more to others during your journey. I think there's, you could be both. You could be both, what I described as decisive and kind of plowing forward, but you could also be that and develop mentor-mentee relationships from people who can add to your journey. I didn't do that for whatever sort of reasons. I never had that. When it was available to me, I didn't leverage it the way I should have. And that probably made, my path harder than it needed to be. But, oh well.
But it's interesting that you say that, because I feel the same thing, which is I feel like I'm a great mentor to people, but I'm not good about asking for help from others. That for some reason, even though I could talk to the next generation of entrepreneurs or operators and say, my best advice to you is have an advisory board, like really look to have people that can help you. I never ask for help. And it's definitely a weakness in terms of myself, because I do feel like I've done the same thing where I've definitely, not that somebody gave me advice, I didn't listen to it. It's like I just didn't ask for the advice. I'm just kind of like out there trying to figure it out on my own more than I probably should. And I
What
think,
about having, so let me describe it slightly differently. Developing relationships so that you're not necessarily asking for advice, but you're benefiting from advice because you've built a relationship, an authentic relationship with someone who can bring kind of experience, bring wisdom, that you'll be accepting to, but not necessarily in the form of, I'm asking for your advice,
Right.
so that you're getting the benefit of that through maybe a more authentic, deeper relationship. Have you had that?
I think I'm getting better at it now, I would say. Yes. I mean, because I do think, and probably since I've been in the natural products industry, because it's so collegial that all of a sudden, because when you're when you're at Pepsi, you would never talk to anybody from Coke. But when I was running Rudi's before, I would know other people that were in the bread company, and the bread business, and we would talk to one another. So yeah, I think there's definitely more of a relationship building and trying to learn in that way as opposed to just asking for help. I think that's a
Yeah.
good distinction.
Yeah. And because that's maybe a better example for me of opportunities that were available to me throughout kind of my journey that I look back on and say, why didn't you take more advantage of that? I would have lots of relationships, but there was some kind of barrier that would always be there. And I think, more so with me because of me.
Right, right.
And I don't know if there was a vulnerability aspect to that was getting in the way, or just kind of just a, derailer personality trait that would get in the way of just, letting your guard down and saying, yeah, you could, use this relationship in a way that can be more mutually beneficial to both of you by just having more conversations and taking the time to kind of, discover things together, as opposed to almost feeling like you need to, show them that you could do it without their help.
Right.
Like, kind of weird, but, that's been part of my journey.
No, I totally get that. And as you said that, what it made me think about in my journey is I think I have been my biggest enabler and my biggest preventer of success. Almost anything that sort of went sideways could generally come back to me.
Mhm.
And something that I did or reacted to, or how I dealt with something. So I do think there's so much about, we actually do control more of our careers than we sometimes think that we do, by how we react to things and how we handle things and whether we take advantage of opportunities or not.
Great. So I want to spend a few minutes and talk about your, currently what you're doing and the relationship with Justin in this context. But then I want to, almost go back to the beginning of the discussion and, talk to those who are following in your footsteps, people people you don't know, but maybe build upon the book you wrote many years ago, and with the now benefit of another number of years in your
Yeah.
journey, what kinds of things would you bring forward to kind of those who are earlier in their career and want to benefit from the journey you went through? So let's start by talking about your current, your current endeavor.
So I'm back at Rudi's. I came back I sold Lily's to Hershey's in 2021. And then the people that owned Rudi's asked me to join the board. And I looked at it, and it was, as I said, like a little rescue animal. It was just kind of limping on the side of the road. And I
And
knew
how did it move from Heinz Celestial to no longer be part of Heinz Celestial?
they sold it to this private equity firm in 2020.
Okay.
And so they're based in London, and they didn't have any other U.S. businesses. But as I said, it was a distressed asset, and there are certain people that like to buy distressed assets. And so when I had the chance to join the board and become an investor in the business, I was like, oh, this is a no-brainer, man. 8 years ago at the time, we were like this big business. The market is for natural products is so much bigger than it was 8 years ago. We just need to get Rudi's back on track, and we're going to be, where we need to be. I would say that the short story is, and this goes to the thing you were talking about earlier about pivoting, and me asking you about playbook, what I did 15 years ago doesn't work today. And it is, and not that I thought that it would, but I didn't realize how different that this was going to be. And I'll just say, just very quickly, it is the hardest thing that I've ever done. It is a turnaround business, trying to get it back to its former glory. We've really pivoted from a product standpoint to say we don't want to just be a bread business, which is what we were before. And we've introduced value-added products in both gluten-free and our signature breads. And we're killing it. But I can't grow fast enough to be, going back to your point about growth, to be able to leverage the bakery that I've got here in Boulder. So it's a very complicated situation of a comeback of a brand, investors, of which now I'm like a major investor in the business. It's very, very hard to juggle everything that needs to be juggled. A comeback story is, Lily's was like just growth on growth. This is taking something that was broken on every level and trying to get it fixed and be relevant in the market and pivot and grow and not lose money and kind of all the stuff that goes with that. So
what are the headwinds that you have to overcome?
my biggest headwind is I have a bakery. Well, it's kind of like when you say your greatest strength is your greatest weakness. One of our biggest asset is I have got a bakery here in Boulder, so I own all my own manufacturing. And underneath one roof, I've got an organic bakery, I've got a gluten-free bakery, and we've just converted all of our offices to a specialty bakery. It's going to go live in like 2 weeks. And so it's so exciting because these new products that we have, they're doing so well, we decided to add a line in there. That's my greatest asset. But the headwind that's associated with that is I can't grow fast enough to cover my overhead. And so I'm in a situation where I'm still losing money. And it is really, really hard to, while you're trying to introduce these new products, get the margins right, get them out and marketed. The headwind is if I was making money right now, this would be a dream job. But because I'm not, and in this current environment, we're trying to raise additional capital. It's really, really, really hard because everybody wants the company that's growing. Like you were talking about the CEO expectations. Everybody wants the company that's growing. Everybody wants the company that's making money. What I'm trying to find right now is someone that can see that Rudi's deserves to be a big platform brand and that we can get there and that they don't look at the P&L and say, oh, I don't want to invest in losses. Instead, they're like, this is a 50-year-old brand that deserves to win. And we've got a good team. So we're getting closer, but I'm definitely working harder than I should at my age.
Yeah, I hear you there.
But anyway, but it's great. I would say I couldn't be more intellectually challenged. And I actually think I am uniquely qualified to do this. So it'll hopefully, maybe in a couple of years, you'll have me back and I'll be able to say the success story that I'm hoping that we're creating. Right now, though, we're like in mud up to my neck and trying to figure out how we get out.
Yeah, well, I applaud you being driven to do this, and I will be rooting for your success for certain. So let's talk before we leave that topic, you're in Justin's relationship now.
Oh,
let's talk about that.
Yeah. So Justin, oh my gosh, this is so crazy. So he had this idea. This is before I was a CEO. He had this idea. Have you ever had an Uncrustable before? Do you know what those are? Okay. So Justin had this idea that he wanted to do an Uncrustable, but he couldn't figure out how to do it. And
actually, I know what Uncrustable is. I don't know that I ever had one.
So it's like a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Yes. That's got little crimped around. They're everywhere. Yep. It's like a cultural phenomena. So
is it healthy?
No, it's not, that's where Justin comes in.
Okay. So because they have them at our, one of the golf clubs I'm a member of, they have them in the drawers. And I never grab one because I'm thinking, don't grab one because you're going to love it, but you're not going to want to, eat it.
So I've got the perfect thing for you. And I also have a gluten-free version coming out. So so Justin had this idea and to create a product that was a better for you version of Uncrustable. And we talked about it. He goes, I just can't get this to work. I can't convince Hormel to do it. This is like really hard. I'm going to go to New Zealand for a year with my family and do a sabbatical. And I'll see you in a year. I'm like, okay. So he goes to New Zealand. While he's gone, I become the CEO of Rudi's because I needed to, because I had all this money in it and they needed a CEO. And so I stepped back in as CEO. So I'm CEO. I've got all this money in the company. I am looking at what we need to do next, and I felt we needed to really pivot to these value-added products. I'm thinking, Justin had this idea. Why don't we look at this? So we look at it, and the white space is incredible. So Smucker's Uncrustables is $1 billion business, and they have like 99.9% market share. doesn't that sound like, and it's not clean label. I mean, like, this is like, yeah, so you're going to go, whoa. So I called Justin.
That sounds mischievous.
So I called Justin in New Zealand. I'm like, Justin, I think we have to do this. I think we have to do your idea. I've got the bread. You had the peanut butter. We need to find somebody that's going to, bring the jam in, and let's make this thing happen. So he's like, I'm all in, man. But he's still in New Zealand for a couple more months. He comes back. And again, Justin had a hugely successful exit. He's a big philanthropist now and does all kinds of great stuff. And he's basically like, I'd like to join your team. Can I be in charge of innovation? And let's make this thing happen. So he joined the company. Again, I'm still like, blows me away. And he developed this product. We call it the Sando. And it's our
that name, Sando.
It's a Sando. It's called Sando. And it's
Sando as in
Sandos, so it's called Sandos, but it's like Sandos, so kind of like a slang for sandwich.
Yep.
And
okay, yeah, Sando.
So we've got we came to market at Whole Foods. So we it's like such a crazy story. We don't have time to tell, but we came to market with it, are killing it. We have a nut-free version for people with peanut allergies. That's one's done okay. The peanut butter one is done great. We are just getting ready to introduce the first ever gluten-free Sando, and it's going to be a monster.
Yeah.
And we are the miracle of our miracles. We're co-branding it with Justin's nut butter.
Oh, sweet.
Which Justin's not involved with Hormel anymore. So this was not like we had Justin and they had the peanut butter, and somehow we were able to bring the two things together. Nice. So yeah, it's really, really, really exciting. So yeah, the product is, it's great. And so Justin he's a quality maniac. He's so
quality
tough.
Maniac.
He's
like
he's tough.
Did you just come up with that, quality maniac?
I did. Because I was just thinking about Justin, and he's a maniac about quality. I mean, he will send me a note like late at night, like, Jane, the bread is just not good enough. What are we going to do to make the bread better? And I'm like, oh, Justin, you're wearing me out. Yeah. But this is why he's
Justin, make your peanut butter better. Yeah, don't worry about my bread.
Exactly. So anyway, so it's been a great match. And he became a major investor too. And so part of, and Cynthia from Lily's is a big, so I brought some people.
You got the all-star team.
Yeah, we do. We really, from an investment standpoint, we've got some great people that are depending on me to make this, into something special.
Good deal. Okay, so let's now give words of wisdom, your words of wisdom to people who are aspiring to have really interesting careers. They can be women, they can be men. Yep. You can focus on women more than men, or you could be, this is not about, gender, this is about people, but take your earlier experiences, fast forward them now, give some words of wisdom.
I've hit on a couple things, and I'll add one other thing to maybe cap it off. What I've talked about several times is hard work. I just think that work ethic, and that doesn't mean you have to work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, but it means you need to be all in when you're doing it, like not just sort of showing up. And I think hard work is really, really important. I think intellectual curiosity, like always wanting to learn and do different. It goes back to your thing about pivoting. Like you're just always trying to think about what's worked, what didn't work. How does my next move come from that, as opposed to just sort of blindly moving forward. And I think that sort of intellectual curiosity is really important. And the thing that I'm spending a lot of time on now, thinking about and talking to people about, is how do you find real passion? And it might not be in your work, but it needs to be something in your life you need to be doing that gets you so excited that it fuels you to do other things. And I think, to me, if you can find the thing that you're passionate about, it builds your confidence, and that confidence leads to other things that you may be involved with.
Yeah, so much of the younger generation that kind of, transition from during the COVID era, I'll say, during the COVID era, there was a lot of value being put into working from home. Quiet quitting was a fun thing, people would, pretend they had one job and also have another job, right. Pretend they were working, but weren't really working. And And, they lost time. They lost time measured in years in terms of like that period of time where you were really early in your career, working really hard, exploring new things, developing very quickly, learning hard lessons, meeting people. A lot of people are coming off of a lot of earlier in career people are coming off of, an extended period, 3, 4, maybe even 5 years where those weren't the values that mattered. The values that mattered were almost the polar opposite of that. And my sense is, they're still kind of trying to find their way. Like how do they get, do they really want to get on the curve you just described? Because the curve you described is one of passion, curiosity, working hard, leaning in, don't necessarily get too caught up in kind of where's this going to lead. Just know that if you're doing those things,
Right.
it will help lead you down whatever your journey is. I think a lot of younger people, that's not kind of during some of the most important formative years of their careers, that's not who they were. That was not the society that they lived in, and maybe it's starting to come back in some ways. But I'll also add to that, those same people are now having to stare at a forward-looking world that AI is
Yes.
is disrupting kind of everything to the benefit of some, but to the threat of many others. Look, if you were talking to younger people who came out of the COVID era, you're trying to express those themes, but you were also could tell it wasn't landing on that group. They're like, that was your generation that thought you had to work hard. It was your generation who thought you had to like do things without knowing what you'd get in return for it. They're not going to use those words, but if you sense that they were having trouble in the department's curiosity, they were having trouble kind of leaning into stuff without knowing the outcome. Maybe they want to do those things, but in the social media era, they're having trouble kind of getting going. What would, if you were sensing that, what would you do if you were trying to help them?
Well, you should have been at my outdoor table last night about 1 a.m. because I have a young woman who's like a daughter to me. She's 26 and her boyfriend who's 28 just came in from Chicago last night, and we were sitting around my table having that.
I'm impressed that you're up at 1 a.m.
I
having
know,
these kind of conversations.
I know. I was like, I told him in advance, I'm like, I know it's your first night in town, but I cannot be wrecked because I'm doing this podcast on Thursday morning. But we were having that whole discussion about being concerned about AI and what jobs are going to be eliminated and what jobs are there today. And what about, how do you get more flexibility? Because they both work at a place that you have to go into the work environment, everything. And I would say the only thing that I can really say that's maybe in addition to what we've already talked about is you just can't overplan it, man. Like you just can you,
Yeah.
what would you do to be 26 or 28 again? And just to be able to say, you're not going to be able to guess where Dan Caruso is going to be that many years later, or Jane Miller that many, you just can't plan it. So I think it really is, it goes just back to this mindset of being open to seeing what's happening, to trying to pivot in your career, but not trying to overthink it, and take chances, like make some mistakes, and because I think one of the things I said last night is, well, just try something. Like the one guy, he's like working at this big investment firm and he wants to maybe do something entrepreneurial, and it's like, go do it. The worst thing that's going to happen is you're not going to like it and you're going to want to go back to the corporate world. Like, no, but like, it's like, there's no risk involved in this, So
the risk is not doing.
It's not doing.
The risk
right?
isn't doing.
Yeah. And sort of feel like you miss something, and I think to me, it's very complicated today. I mean, I think, because everybody's trying to go through LinkedIn or through Indeed or Monster. I mean, can you imagine putting a resume in with 100,000 other people and you have to have exactly the right.
Most of who are bots anyways.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, it's, I think networking is important, trying to meet people, not because you're trying to look for a job, but just because you want to meet interesting people. And I think just to not overthink it too much, actually.
Yeah, that's good advice. Anything else that, we didn't touch on that, is on your mind that you want to bring up?
Well, no. I mean, I thank you so much for your time. It's so much fun to talk about a career, and just wish that the next generation of leaders, don't have to make some of the same mistake, and they can make some of
or maybe they can make more mistakes.
Yeah.
I think that's really, part of what we both were saying is don't try to not make mistakes.
Right.
Try to make mistakes and try to make a lot of mistakes. Because,
And new mistakes, right? Do new ones, you know?
Maybe old mistakes, maybe new mistakes, but hopefully benefiting from people around you. But don't benefit by trying to avoid mistakes. Benefit from getting more comfortable with doing things. And some of those aren't going to feel right. And some of what you do, you're going to wish you didn't do. And that's okay, because you'll learn from it and you'll move on and try to avoid really, really, really bad mistakes. That's not good. But if you try to avoid mistakes, the best way to avoid mistakes is do nothing. If you do nothing, you're going to get nothing out of whatever your journey is. So, yeah, make mistakes.
I think that's right. And what that made me think of also is the privilege that we have to be able to do that. Because I'll bring it back to the start of the conversation with my mom. She had no options. And probably most everybody that is listening to us talk has the privilege of being able to switch jobs, start something new, try something, and take chances. Mm-hmm. And I think with that privilege, it's your responsibility to do something great with your life. When you're given the tools to be able, whether it's an education or it's your family or your friends or whatever it is, that you're not a single mom with 4 kids working 3 jobs, that's rough, man. And the rest of us, with the privilege that we have, how do we take advantage of that and share that with others, I think.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I like this, the notion of, I'm just going to repeat some of your words. If you're watching this, almost by definition, you probably have something in your life that we now use the word privilege. We never use that word, ourselves, but in the last 6, 7, 8 years, right. That's been a word. But feel like, okay, I have a privilege. I know that because, most people would never discover a podcast like this who, grew up in circumstances right. where they've got more struggles, but it's your responsibility, if you have privilege, to do something special with your life.
Yes.
Do something impactful with your life, for yourself, for the people around you, for those who you can help along the way, but starting with yourself, take advantage of this opportunity to live a really interesting and fulfilling life. And, we'll encourage you along the way to try to be impactful on others as well. So that's probably a great way to end this.
I love it. Right? I'm motivated. I'm going to go out and try to make some impact.
You are making an impact. You're going to bring Rudi back from limping along to being kind of the world's greatest natural product brand that has ever been.
All right. Hopefully that'll come true.
All right.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Kendall Weinberg, with support from Gibson Seeger, Katie McDonald, and Elise Pettigrew.